call this meeting, Apache Junction Board of Adjustment to order. It is 7 p.m. on Monday, April 8th. Would you please all rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? Pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Roll call, please.
Board Member Biggs.
Present.
Vice Chair Gage.
Present.
Board Member Weller.
Here.
Board Member Walde.
Here.
Board Member Bucine.
Present. Here.
Board Member Bory.
Here.
Chairman Shanebeck.
Here.
6 present, we have a quorum, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I would entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda.
Mr. Chair, I make a motion to approve the consent agenda.
I have a second.
I second.
Moved and seconded. Roll call, please.
Vice Chair Gage.
Yes.
Board Member Weller.
Yes. I'm sorry.
Board Member Biggs.
Yes.
Chairman Shanebeck.
Yes.
Board Member Walde.
Yes.
Board Member Bory.
Yes.
So moved, Mr. Chairman.
Well, being as we have no public hearings, we have no old business, we'll move right on into new business, which is a presentation and discussion on our Code of Conduct, Conflict of Interest, Open Meeting Law, Public Record Law, and Parliamentary Procedure by the City Attorney, Mr. Stern, please.
Good evening, Board. Very nice to see all of you here. Figured some of you have seen this before and didn't want to hear it, but I'm glad you're here. We have actually a new part. Most of you have seen all these except for the Code of Conduct. That's a new one that you have not seen before. Council passed this recently. And I can go through all these. You can interrupt if you have questions. That's not a problem for me at all. And please have questions, because otherwise it's just a...
Turn your mic up a little bit, Joe, please.
I don't know how to turn it up.
There's a button there that...
No, it's on green.
They don't have what we have.
So is that better?
Yeah.
Okay. So we'll just go in the order that they're presented, starting with the yellow copy, Code of Conduct.
They're colorblind.
This item has been, a matter of discussion for probably many years. And I think the Board of Adjustment may have had its own Code of Conduct many years ago. I think Planning and Zoning may have also, but this one is adopted by the council. So this one is the one that you really should pay attention to. And this does apply to board and commissions as well as council members, unless otherwise inapplicable. And I'm not going to go through every single one of these because you can read this for yourself, but the purpose of it is really you have the common goal with the city being the priority. That's why you're here. That's why you were appointed. Council wanted you to focus in on city items, not personal items or private interests. So you give everybody equal treatment, just like you would do. And some of this sounds like common sense. I get that. And some of you, I've heard some when this thing was passed finally, this was like the fourth or third meeting where it finally got passed. Some board and commission members may feel that this is an attack on their integrity, and that's not the intent of this at all. It is common sense stuff that needs to be brought out because it just needs to be on paper, and you all need to see what the council sees as the important issues. Comply with the law, that's an easy one. And that includes open meeting law, conflicts of interest, public records, election, and financial disclosure laws. And those are just examples. Professional conduct. This one is important, so I'm going to read the whole thing. Members shall conduct themselves above reproach and shall avoid even the appearance of impropriety. They should never act on a matter where their impartiality might reasonably be questioned. They have a personal bias or prejudice concerning a party or representatives thereof, a staff member or members of the public who support or oppose a party, or they have personal knowledge of facts that are in dispute that would not be known by staff or the public at large. The question is whether their impartiality might be questioned from the perspective of a reasonable person.
So I think one thing there that's important to understand is even though we personally may feel that we can make a non-biased decision, it's the perception of the public whether or not we can make an unbiased decision that's most important.
I would agree with that characterization. So how does it look to the public? That's the question. You always got to step back and say, well, if I do this, how's that going to look? Going to the public meeting and due process. This one's pretty straightforward also. I don't want to get into that one, except that it's really how you conduct a meeting, and it's respect for other members, respect for the public. You perform your duties with due process in mind. A party gets the chance to have their case, they paid their fee, and so they get to present their case. The other side, usually it's the city, they get to present their case. And there could be some cross-examination of witnesses. Let that happen. This is not a court of law, although you are quasi-judicial. So you are different than the other board and commissions because you are quasi-judicial. You do have a judicial aspect here. You're not a court of law, but you're on your way there because you decide cases that do not get appealed to the city council. State law says that a Board of Adjustment matter can be appealed to the city council once the city has hit 100,000 people. We're not even close. So essentially it goes to a court of law if someone wants to appeal it. So in the court, in that case, it's not a new trial with the court. It's not trial de novo, that's called new trial. Basically, I've had court reporters in here before, and that's because if the tape recording or the video doesn't work, I got to have a record that the judge could look at, and the judge gets to decide whether there was an arbitrary and capricious decision. That's why I have the backup on certain cases, especially when there's other attorneys involved. So I think someone had that question once, and that does answer that question.
Good old Fred.
I'm sorry, is there a question?
Negative.
Okay. Members should always be fair, objective, and respectful at all meetings and on social media, letters to the editor, articles, or in other public communications. So, if you're talking about a case that's coming up, you shouldn't be doing that on social media, and you shouldn't really be talking to anybody about it, except sometimes I'm not the attorney. We've had cases where actually some parties show up. Well, it's going to be rare that I'm not your attorney in this case. However, there may be cases where I'm not. And so you shouldn't be talking to me about the case, especially if I'm not the attorney for the city. Because sometimes you will see that. It's going to be rare, but it could happen. And you will see that actually. Members should always, members should show great respect for the chair and always seek recognition before speaking. That rule gets violated. I've seen it many, many times in different commissions, even at council. And you need to respect the chair and the position. The chair is here to keep order, and that will help the chair keep order.
When we do have a case, and the last case we had, I think people did very well following that. I think it was really good. People asked for recognition before speaking, and that is the only way to keep this thing reasonable. Otherwise, we get chaos. So I appreciate the cooperation in the past, and I look forward to more of it in the future.
And especially if it gets appealed, because then the judge could follow what's going on. Sometimes it's hard if a judge is going to watch. If the case gets forwarded to the Superior Court, the judge is first going to want to watch this and listen to it. And sometimes there's board members talking over each other. That's difficult. And if I don't have a court reporter here, it's hard to take it down. And even then, you're going to see something in the court reporter document that says inaudible, and that's not good. So it's good to get the chair to say, yes, you may be recognized if you have a comment. This is another one, under E, the chair shall not allow speakers to address the audience, and they should be instructed to address only the public body when making comments. Sometimes at council meetings, I've seen people get up, they turn their back to the board, and they start talking to the audience. The chair will not let that happen, I would hope, especially on a Board of Adjustment matter, because whoever's speaking should be trying to convince you to do something or not to do something. So you are really the target of the conversation, not the public. And I've seen that happen, especially on highly political issues. Then you get the crowd gets charged and they start clapping, and then sometimes some board members get intimidated, or even council members. I've seen that happen over my tenure here. Advocacy. Members do not lose their First Amendment right by virtue of becoming a member. However, when they decide to engage in social media, letters of editor, articles, or other public statements, they must not hold themselves out as being associated with the city, and they shall explicitly advise their views do not necessarily reflect the views of the city or the majority of the public body. This one really doesn't apply to you, because in a way, you haven't lost your First Amendment rights, but acting in a quasi-judicial manner, you shouldn't be even discussing this, even making an opinion on it. Even after the case, you shouldn't be, because once again, you're in a quasi-judicial capacity. Non-interference and treatment with staff. Basically, this section, the point of this was that council says, you know, they are the experts. Let them tell you what their opinion is. And then your job is basically to take the facts and then make a decision. It's not to question their technical abilities. Gifts, favors, I think that's pretty common sense. Meeting distractions, this was a big one at the council, that the council had some difficulty in formulating the language. The issue was electronic devices. At what point should you be using those while you're sitting up there? Like right now, are any of you using your electronic devices? Well, it might be sitting next to you and you're waiting for a call from a significant other, okay. But you're not texting someone in the audience. Well, we don't have any cases tonight, but if you were doing that, that would be a total violation, and I think that's pretty obvious. But as for a distraction, someone texts you something from the audience, you really shouldn't be responding to it, especially if it's a case that's ongoing right now, because that's something the judge, if it ever gets to an appeal, is not going to see, and that's really not fair to either party. Influencing, well, let me just go back to that. If you have a question of staff, you ask the question. If you have a question of the applicant, you ask the question and you put it on the record. And that's the fairness part of this whole process. Influencing elections, I think that's straightforward. Communication with litigants, this is a very important one. Members should use caution while communicating with litigants or their representatives during any pending lawsuits against the city. However, social graces such as waving or exchanging pleasantries may be extended. So what does that mean? If you know that a case is coming before you, you really shouldn't be talking to that party. They wave to you in the store, that's okay. But if they say, hey, I've got a case coming up, I want to tell you about that. No, you walk away and say, I'm sorry, I can't talk about that. That case is coming up. And I think that's common sense. But it had to be specifically put in a document so that you see it. Criticism of staff, I'm going to...
Joel, I'm sorry, can
sure.
I ask a question on that one?
Please.
Because it's been no secret that it has experienced in my own life in the last 6 months. At what point do you feel is at the point of our acknowledgement of a pending case? Because there are certain cases that I think the 6 of us sitting up here are aware will be coming or not coming in the next 6 months or a year, but without officially knowing. Like, to me, I would not say that I know of an actual case until I have the paperwork in my hand to say that there is this case dealing with this business or this situation. I may know that a case is coming, but if I don't know what's sitting on that docket, then I don't feel that I know that that is on that agenda.
And that's a very good question, and the answer is, even if you have an inkling of it, you probably should ask staff, hey, is there a case coming up involving so-and-so? If there is, then at that point, you really need to step back and not deal with those litigants, or if they are litigants, or that you are told by staff, yes, there's a case coming up, you're gonna see it in April, May, and it might get continued. Even if they say that, it's like you shouldn't be talking to them, because you know that the case is coming before you.
Yes, I understand that point. So now going back to then the council's discussion, there were council members who were adamant about the fact of this is a small town, it's a small community. Yes, you see them in the grocery store or whatever. You visit their establishment, you've developed a friendship outside of our own business here. What is the best way to potentially deal with that? Because I don't feel that we should have to cut off all communication for months on end or years, depending on how long things may or may not happen, because there may or may not be something coming down the pipeline. I mean, we never know. It changes on a day-to-day on many cases, and I don't think that that's just with us. That's planning and zoning or city council or anything. So how do we go about that? Because that does affect every single one of us.
Well, it's a balancing test. And essentially, remember, you're being watched, especially on high-profile cases. You're being watched, and it may not be by anybody you know, and it may be another party that is interested or will be affected by your decision. And the last thing you want is, say there's an appeal, the last thing you want is some kind of brief coming from an interested party who you didn't know who was interested at the time, and they were affected by your ruling, and now they're claiming that there was a conflict of interest, so this entire process is corrupt and has to be redone, and the trial has to be redone. You don't want that before a judge. You certainly don't. So you have to, in your mind, realize that, okay, by talking to this person, even though the case may or may not be coming, although I've been told by staff that it might be, I think you need to step back and you need to respect that, because you're here for the city's interest, not your own, and not any business with that individual, because that's not the city's interest.
I guess the other choice is to keep your relationship and recuse yourself from that particular case.
Absolutely. Recusal is
If the
the way
relationship
out.
is more important.
However, recusal, that means you step out and you will not be voting on an item. But you're also, under recusal, you're not supposed to impact the decision of any kind in any way. And yes, I know, First Amendment, you'd like to get up, especially if it's a friend of yours, and you want to maybe testify for the person. Well, that's not a full recusal. It certainly isn't in the legal if that happened to an attorney. Absolutely not. And so recusal means you step out of it, you don't talk to anybody about it, and you keep it to yourself. That's what you're supposed to do. That's my opinion. Okay. Let's see. Let's move on. You know, I think, let's go to page 4. General rules of decorum. We've kind of already talked about this. No personal attacks, be polite to speakers. Treat the public and staff with respect, dress professionally, actively listen without diversions. Some of that's a repeat, but believe me, this was a real triumph in getting this passed, so I'm not going to go into all the minor things that could be changed, but incompatibility of office. Well, when it comes to the Board of Adjustment, I think if you're on any other city board commission, except for sewer district, you're good there. Mr. Gage, you're good there. But for, say you were on planning and zoning, I think that'd be incompatibility of office with this one. So I think you all understand that one. Quasi-judicial capacities, we've already talked about that. Legal training, you're doing it now. And also, there may be other ones that get offered up that Larry will keep you apprised of. And I think that is it for the code of conduct. Any other questions before we move on? No? Okay. Conflict of interest law. What is the purpose? It's to remove or limit the possibility of personal influence which might bear upon a public official's decision. It prevents self-dealing by public officials and public employees. The financial interests of public officials or employees must not conflict with the unbiased performance of their public duties. One cannot serve two masters with conflicting interests. I read this because this is really the core of this entire document. The question is, and it's usually the biggest question for conflicts, do you have a proprietary or pecuniary interest? So do you have a money interest of any kind or a property interest? That's the key to the entire question. And so that's the substantial interest. Why should you care about this? If you don't care, you shouldn't be on this board. If you do care, there are some reasons, and I've listed them on page 2. As I stated before, if there's a problem and it's proven there's a conflict, even at an appeal level, your decision can be basically mooted out by the judge, and then the judge can do their own retrial, even if the record wasn't corrupt. Say when I say corrupted, the judge was able to hear and see everything, but even if someone made the argument that you had a conflict, that's going to kill the entire decision. So the judge would then rehear it. So that's more money, and that's more time, and that's a risk for both parties also.
Could you be called up as a witness, or could you be called up or subpoenaed in any case for that?
Yes, you could. If the one party who's alleging that you have a conflict, they could call you as a witness and have a separate hearing on it before the judge. Say, Your Honor, we need to have this hearing before we go to the main issue, because if you decided the process was contaminated because of a conflict, then I think you need to have a trial de novo. That's what I would do if I was an applicant, or even on the city side. And then I would try to call you as a witness, and then the city would appoint you an attorney, so more money, and then the attorney would probably try to keep you from being deposed. But if it's not corruption, but if there was a conflict charge and there was sufficient evidence, I think a judge might want to hear it. These are extreme cases, of course, and I just don't see that ever happening, but it could happen. And it could happen in the high-profile cases, so keep that in mind. Remote interest, I've listed them, and essentially the biggest one that I've seen, especially on legislative matters, would be where there's a class, you're one in a class of 10 or more. And if you do have that kind of relationship, then there's no conflict. Perfect example, a church steeple. Church wanted to have a heightened church steeple, and the mayor at the time was a member of the church. Well, he happened to be one of probably 200 or 300 people in that class, being a church member. Therefore, it wasn't a conflict, and he did vote on the case, and basically the church steeple height was approved. So that's just an example. There's other types of remote interests, and we're not going to go through those right now. If you think you have a conflict, or what do you do if you don't know? You come to me, tell me all the facts. I will then write up a public document that says either you have a conflict or not. And if you don't have a conflict, it's good to have, because then you, especially if people are accusing you of having a conflict. And you say, well, I've got this thing from the city attorney. I don't have a conflict. I'm voting on this. And then it would get filed with the city clerk. It's public record. If it turns out that I was wrong, you're free. And your decision, well, the decision might be corrupted, but you're good. Nothing happens to you. So that's the good thing about coming to me before the case is heard, if you think you even have a possibility of having a conflict.
Joel, what do we do if we believe that another board member has a conflict? Do we go to you? Do we
there's nothing I could do as the attorney, because that's really it's up to the individual board member to declare the conflict. I can't make one of you declare a conflict. I've seen, in my time here, I've seen a member go to the chair and say, hey, I got this issue with this other board member. Can you talk to that person? That's been done. Or if it's the chair that's the problem, then you'd go to another board member and say, hey, what do you want to do on this? You can't have a quorum, though. So you can't have 4 where you go and meet with that person. You can have up to 3, but at that point, you might want to come to me if it's the chair, and then I can assist you in maybe having a meeting. I could do that. But out of the chute, I think the best person to go to is the chair, if it's not the chair that you're talking about.
So, again, this is my personal experience over the last several months. A board member or council member from another board, or obviously the council, believed that I had a conflict of interest and brought that out into the public light without ever speaking to me personally about that. Is that something that we, not only as a board, but I think overall, we do need to look at that? And I fully agree with all of these 5 documents and looking at processes, but I do believe that there should be some form of a process where we look at those internally before it gets broadcasted out into the real world and throws everybody into a tizzy, because that was not a very fun time personally. And I know I came to you multiple times during that period of time, as well as Frank. And so what does that process look like, or how could we as a board ensure that if we believe one of the other 6 members has a conflict, to go to the chair, go to you, and deal with that before it becomes a public spectacle?
Pretty much what I already said.
Okay.
The process itself, and these are baby steps. I shouldn't say baby steps, but getting this code of conduct passed it really needed to be done.
Mm-hmm.
And I looked at different cities, different towns, and this could have been a 200-page document for the perfect code of conduct, but no one wanted to pass that. I mean, we're lucky this is only 4 pages, but I think the next step sometime when the city gets bigger, when it gets bigger, would be exactly what you're talking about, would be, okay, what's the actual process to identify? What's the official process? And believe me, this had challenges getting this passed. So to get that passed, that's going to take longer, and there probably will have to be more incidents where it would justify it. That's probably how I would see it from a council member's perspective.
So earlier you also mentioned that in the past, the Board of Adjustments and possibly Planning and Zoning had their own version of a code of conduct. Is that possibly an addendum that we can add to our code of conduct as the Board of Adjustments moving forward, and kind of set the tone of this is what we want everybody to do?
I'm not sure the rules allow that, and especially if you want it, I think the council would have to pass it now that they've taken action in the yellow document. But that's something I could research.
Thank you.
You're welcome. If you do have a conflict, you disclose and withdraw. So you come to the meeting, and the chair would read the title. You say, Mr. Chair, I want to disclose that I have a conflict, and I am now withdrawing from this matter. And you leave the room. And once again, as I stated on the code of conduct, don't be talking to people about it. Don't be trying to influence people. Certainly don't come to the podium. I know it's a First Amendment right, but once again, you're quasi-judicial, and you got to be careful on that issue. It's not just you also, by the way, it's also your relative. And so if you go to page 6, and it's under H, what is a relative? An individual within 2 degrees of kinship, including spouse, child, child's child, parent, grandparent, brother or sister of whole or half blood, and their spouses and the parent, brother, sister, or child of a spouse. That's because that's been asked before. Well, what's a relative? I mean, come on, it's my second cousin. It's like, what's that? Well, you got to be careful with that. 2 degrees of kinship. I think if they're related to you in any way, not If you're a Smith, okay, you're related to all Smiths, but I don't think that's what they're talking about. It's somebody who's fairly close in time or in relationship. Okay, it's already a half an hour. I can't believe I've taken that long, so let's go to the next item. Open
Joel?
meeting law. Yes,
Joel, or Mr. Chair, I should say, Mr. Chair, could I ask Joel a question?
Yes, please.
The relationship between these two documents? So one deals with this pecuniary interest, like a financial interest. This thing is more, I'm trying to see if I can explain this, that the conflict of interest, so just because you're acquainted with somebody is different, or you're a friend of theirs, this is more, the yellow one is more if you're an acquaintance of somebody and you think there might be somebody who thinks you have a conflict, real or imagined, or perceived. Whereas this is under the definition, a pecuniary interest, by a person gain or lose something. So again, just because you're an acquaintance, you might say, you know, I don't really want to be involved in this because it might be perceived that I have a conflict, when I don't have a real conflict, because I don't have a pecuniary conflict, if you will, but I do have, you know, see where I'm going with it?
I think an example would be if a friend is the applicant's your friend. A friend, that's it. But there's no money that's going to be exchanged if you vote yes or no. And so in that case, can you hear the case? Legally, you can. I think what Larry's saying is, well, how does that look if it's well known that you know this person? I think that's where you're going, correct?
Right, where the conflict, or the code of conduct is almost a higher standard, so to speak. It's you have to comply with this, but the code of conduct is an expectation that's even higher than the conflict of interest.
It is when it comes to an appearance of impropriety. I
Yeah,
would agree with
okay.
that. Yes.
All right, thank you.
Going to the purple sheet, open meeting law. Why should you care about the open meeting law? Why should anybody care? Who wants to? There's a bunch of reasons why. Because if you don't follow the open meeting law, your action could be nullified by a judge, the enforcement action by attorney general or county attorney, and that gets expensive. They can bill back the cost. Personal civil penalty in the amount of $500 per violation. Also, criminal fines could be attached. Personal liability for attorney fees. Removal from public office. Recalls, these go to council. And then the last one, embarrassment to city elected officials, staff. Some people don't care about the embarrassment, but you probably should. When does it apply? It applies when there is a quorum present in a public body. Does that mean in this room? Yes. Does it mean at a party? If there's a quorum present, yes, absolutely. Social events. You could all be at a social event. You probably shouldn't be sitting at the same table. Can you? Technically, yes. Is there an appearance of impropriety? Yes. And will the Attorney General probably do something about that, even if it's proven that nothing was said about a case? Yeah, they're probably going to hit us with some kind of nasty order. I don't think they'd go so far as to do a consent decree, where that means they would have to have a court reporter at these. It would be mandated to be a court reporter, and there'd be another attorney that reports back to the court on every action for 2 or 3 years. I don't think they do that. They would do that if there was a violation, though. Absolutely. So you can't really talk about stuff that's on the agenda when there's a quorum. You are essentially one of the committees, so you are subject to the open meeting law. Going to notice, there's a public notice, there's agendas. On the agenda, there's some misconception, which I don't know where it comes from, that minutes have to be verbatim. That is absolutely false. State law allows minutes to be essentially a summary of what happened, who voted on what, how they voted, what the subject was, and move on. The city in the past city clerk actually for council meetings was very good at minutes. She would listen to the tapes, And she would have very detailed minutes. Did she have to? No, she did not. But she did, and so people got used to that over the years. Jan Mason's minutes were really good. Jan Mason left last year, and so there was not the staff to do that detailed level, especially for council meetings. So now we go strictly by the law. And the law is who voted, how they voted, and what the vote was, and what the subject was. That's what you do. If you really want to, now that everything is televised, you can go online and you can take a look at past council meetings. And you can actually listen to the entire item if you want. And I know that's a little inconvenient for some people who don't want to read, or who they don't want to spend hours watching something, and they'd rather read it in a 20-page document. But that's just how the law is. So I wanted to clear that one up, because that has been a misconception for at least a year and, 4 months. There's an agenda that has to be done. I think you all know that. There's a certain order. I already talked about minutes. Executive sessions. Now, this one does apply to you, because there will be cases where you need to be prepped before the case starts. So the order will be different than what you see at council meetings. Council usually has an executive session if they need one, and it's usually before the meeting, the public meeting even begins. It's different here because you don't have a lot of meetings, and so when there's an executive session, you're going to convene the meeting and then go into executive session. Speak to an attorney, either me or someone else, and then when you're done with that, you come out and then you hear the case. So that's how it is done, and that is the correct way. And if you need to go back into executive session because something came up during the meeting, you also have that right. You can do that. It's only good for legal advice. And in your case, it's really just legal advice. It's none of these other things. Those are council matters usually. Let's see, categorical exemptions. There's certain things the open meeting law does not apply to. And we talked about the social events one. That was the big one that I wanted to bring to your attention. Public participation and access to meetings. This one was added. This is a new one. While the public must be allowed to attend and listen to deliberations and proceedings taking place in all public meetings, there's no right of the public to participate in the discussion or in the ultimate decision of the public body. In your case, you get to hear, you have public hearings on pretty much every item where there's an applicant. That's when they get to speak, the public. And you get to hear each one. They get 5 minutes. And that's it. Then you make your decision, essentially, in public. You talk among yourselves, but the meeting in public, the public is not allowed to come back up and now give you more evidence or more testimony. It's not supposed to work that way, and sometimes it does. I've seen that happen. Not necessarily at the, I'm sorry, yes, sir.
Mr. Stern, we have had people come up and give us comments, and then we wanted a clarification and asked them to come back up. Is that permitted?
That is allowed by the chair, and then you have to reopen the public hearing. So then anybody else can say, well, wait, he's saying that? Well, that's not true, and here's why. Everything needs to be in public. It needs to be transparent.
Okay.
So someone could give you a note. I wouldn't encourage it, but if they do, you can't ignore it because your duty is to hear everything. So you ask the chair, hey, I got this note. Can we reopen the public hearing so that person can come back up? And anybody else who wants to speak.
Joel, is that to reopen a public hearing, is that by a vote of the board or at the chair's discretion?
I think that's chair's discretion on that issue. Yes. Same with the mayor. The mayor has that ability. I did not expect to take this much time. I apologize. Public records law. Why do you care about that? If you don't care about open meeting law, why would you care about public records law? Well, this is not so much for you, but I think you should know about it. Everything that's done in public, if it has some kind of notation, even electronic or paper, that's a public record. If it's kept in the business of the city, that's a public record. Your packet tonight is a public record. It's open to inspection, and also if someone wants a copy, they can ask for a copy, even though they could go look at it on the internet. Some people want the hard copy. Some people can't print it out, so they come to the city and then they have to pay for it. Anyway, why does that matter? Well, Arizona Public Records Law is broader than the Freedom of Information Act, but when interpreting the Public Record Act, it is appropriate to look at FOIA for guidance. Everything needs to be in public to the extent it can be. There's certain things, and we'll go into that, things that are not necessarily public. A definition of a public record, it's a huge, huge definition under Title 41, and it basically means every piece of paper, like I said earlier, that is, and every electronic record also that is kept, that is maintained. Yes, sir.
I've heard it that if we take notes during a meeting, are those notes also then become public record?
Technically, that would be, yes, unless they're executive session notes, then the answer is no.
But if there's somebody testifying here and I'm writing notes about what they say, theoretically, I should turn those over to Rudy or somebody to have those reproduced.
Technically, you should be doing that, yes. If you didn't take any notes, fine, but if you did, given to Rudy saying this should be part of the record keeping and record retention schedule, meaning after so much time, the city is supposed to destroy certain records. And there's a schedule that the state mandates us to do. If a public record request is made, it has to be done promptly. What does promptly mean? Does that mean drop everything and just get it done? Or can you wait 2 weeks? Well, there's different definitions, but I think it means drop everything and get it done within a reasonable amount of time. So if it takes you to drop everything to do it in a reasonable amount of time, then that's how it shall be done. And we've gotten all sorts of public record requests, and if it's a burden to the city, you could make that argument to a judge, but I don't like making those arguments because judges don't like those arguments. And the judge says, you're a city, you should be able to handle this, unless they're looking for 50,000 records, that's different. But if it's just a few hundred records or a few hundred pages, that's going to be granted. If you don't do it promptly, what happens? If they have an attorney, they can say, you didn't do it promptly, I'm going to court. They can get their attorney fees if they prove that you did not do it promptly. And they convince the judge that it wasn't done promptly. And then they get all their attorney fees. That's almost automatic. Especially now, more and more, that is becoming automatic. It's an assault on cities and towns and counties where some people just put out fake news that says, oh, the government's bad, and so they're all guilty. That's what some people think. It's not true, but I mean, not every government employee is perfect. However, I've been in government many, many years, and yes, I've seen some bad actors, but not that many. Not like that. Not where they hide things and shred stuff. I've not seen that. Very, very rarely have I seen that. Who can obtain public records? Anybody can. They just make a request to do it. They don't have to tell you why either, which is fine. They don't have to tell you why. We do charge a fee, 25 cents for non-commercial, 50 cents for commercial. And I think there's some case law that I added at the back in case you can't sleep tonight. That would be a good reading material. And so let's move on to the last one. Parliamentary procedure. This is also a new one that you have not seen before. Robert's Rules is what we're talking about. It's a book that was written, and now it's on the 11th edition. And it goes back to the 1800s where there was an army soldier who was told, you're going to a church meeting, and you're going to run the meeting. And so that didn't go so well for Henry Martin Robert. After the meeting, he said, I'm going to have some rules because that was ridiculous. And so basically he started creating rules. At one point, they became also rules for Congress. So they're really meant for legislative, more legislative than a quasi-judicial board or even a city council. It's more for the bigger Congress. However, there are aspects of Robert's rules that do apply, and you generally do follow them, which is good that you do. City code says you're supposed to follow them. If you don't, what happens? Well, if it's a Fifth Amendment violation, due process, that's going to be a problem. Like you didn't let someone speak. An applicant, you said, no, you can't speak. I don't like the color of your tie tonight, so I'm not going to let you speak. Obviously, that's a violation. It's also a violation of the city code. You're supposed to follow the rules. But what if it's something insignificant, and so it didn't matter on the vote? Then probably nothing's going to happen. They're guidelines. That's how I look at them. They're not absolute statutory. If you don't do it, then the matter's going to be held void, because I don't think that would happen in most cases. However, the rules are designed to meet the following 7 goals. Decision-making is done by a majority vote. Every member of the voting body has equal rights and privileges to make motions, ask questions, speak, and vote. Minority views may be heard and considered. The process is simple and direct. There is requirement to follow the basic motion rules. Generally, 1 question at a time is considered. Voting members are to be impartial and should seek recognition for the chair before speaking and should never express personal attacks. So some of this is an overlap with code of conduct. Motions are, anybody could make a motion. You have to be recognized first, then you make the motion. If you say, you know, I don't want to vote on this tonight. I feel that I want to abstain. Well, then my question, and I will have to speak up, will be, do you have a conflict? Is that why you are abstaining? And if the answer is no, then I'm going to say, well, then you have to vote. And if you don't vote, then the vote is going to be treated in the positive, as if you voted yes. That's how Robert's Rules reads. I know it's a little odd. If you don't want to vote, why should you have to vote? Well, that's why. The conflict of interest is the only reason you should not be voting. Or if you're not here, then it's recorded as a no vote, or actually you weren't there. So there's different types of motions. You can read those yourself. And there's nomination of officers.
I think we have that one down.
I think you do too.
We're getting better at it.
I think the planning and zoning has it down too.
We set the bar on that one. I saw that meeting. We did
Yeah.
a good job.
Are there any questions about any of this?
Mr. Chair, I have a question for Joel. On page 2, motions, in that first paragraph, it says typically and not exactly in sync with Robert's rules, it is common practice for the council and its boards and commissions to first have a discussion before a motion is made, not after the motion is made or after a second. So that is just local practice. But Roberts typically says you have a motion on the floor, and then you have a second, and then you have discussion, and then you're discussing the motion, whereas someone comes up and talks, and then they talk about it, Plan Commission especially. They'll hear both sides, they'll talk about it amongst themselves, then someone will make a motion. So it's okay so we generally follow Roberts, but our local practice has been, and that's okay, to have a discussion before the motion.
It is. However, I've been here almost 20-plus years, well, 22 years in August. That's rare to see that they follow the rules exactly like that. And they didn't do it before I came either. So basically, you can, you hear the case, and basically you can then discuss the item before there's even an motion. Then somebody could make a motion. And then the practice has been, well, we've already discussed it, so why do we have to discuss it again? Why do the rules require that? You don't have to. You can, once you've discussed it, you're good, and then you can call for a vote.
So the idea, though, if you discuss it before the motion, you may be, in terms of all these other different color papers, trying to sway your fellow person
which I don't know, my practice or where I've worked before, no discussion until a motion's been made and second. So now you have something on the floor. Because then you can use that opportunity before a motion is made to try to, you're saying what you want, but you're also could get into groupthink or trying to sway, which again, I think, to me, it's better if you do it after, but I just,
Braden, you have
Sure.
something to say?
Chairman.
Hang on a second, Braden had it.
I believe, maybe not on this board, but at least not in my memory, I believe there have been times where once a motion is made, then there's been discussion, and then they try to change the motion because once okay, if I make a motion, I have to be the one to amend the motion, correct?
No,
Or
anybody can.
withdraw the motion at that point, because there's a motion on the table.
If there's a motion on the table, and someone says, well, wait, I don't really like that, and you're still in discussion mode, even though you made the motion already, and then someone else could say, I'd like to amend that. Then you could say, okay, I withdraw that, and then they could amend it, or you could have a new motion too.
But it would have to come down to, actually, we have had this happen with the Board of Adjustments. There was a motion that was made, somebody wanted to make the amendment, and there was discussion about whether or not we would change the amendment, or whether we would change the motion. So that has to occur before you can move forward. There has to be an agreement that the motion is going to be changed by that person. We've had this, it happened sometime last year on one of the actual cases that we've heard.
And remember, no motion is absolutely perfect unless everybody agrees to it. So Larry's way of doing it would possibly clear that up, but
That'd be the way I prefer to do it too. Make the motion, have it seconded, and then have the discussion.
then that's fine. I'm just saying it's okay to do it the other way, which I've seen.
How can you make a decision if you haven't got the facts?
Well, no, you have the facts because you've discussed it. Then someone makes a
We have
motion.
one side of the facts.
Well, someone would make, no, everybody's discussing it after the public comment, okay? And then all of a sudden, someone says, well, okay, and everybody looks at each other, it's time for a motion. And then it appears that people already agreed because you already discussed it. So I've seen that many times. But if you rather have a motion on the floor, I mean, how do you know what to really make a motion on if you haven't really discussed it yet?
Well, I think
Right.
you can have a discussion before, but after the motion's been made and seconded, in my mind, there's still a period of time open for further discussion.
After you second it, yes, you can, and then you
After-
call for a before you call for the motion.
Before I call for the
Before
vote.
you call for the vote.
Right.
Sorry.
Motion's been made and seconded, and I feel then there still is an opportunity for discussion before the roll call.
Yes, because someone still could make an amendment to that.
Right.
Correct.
But there can be discussion before also.
There can be.
But that's at the discretion of the chair, correct?
There's
So,
no rule that says that.
okay, so a hypothetical, we make a motion to adjourn the meeting and decide, okay, we obviously know it's coming, we have the discussion that we're going to adjourn the meeting, we make the motion, it's motion seconded, and then we can have further discussion, and if somebody decides that we don't want to adjourn the meeting, then we have that process and that discussion and decide, are we amending the motion, are we not amending it, and then move forward.
I suppose on an adjournment's not a good example.
I'm-
'cause who wants to do that? You know? Especially after I spent almost an hour on this, you probably want it. Exactly. But yes,
Okay, are there any further questions? Well, despite you feeling you went too long, I think this is all important that it's down on paper, and I think it's important that it's official, we've all had it given to us, explained to us, because ordinarily in the course of things, not much happens. But we don't know when a case is gonna come that's gonna be very critical and could cost this city a lot of money, and we could make a bad decision. So despite the fact you think it went a little long, I really appreciate the presentation. If there is no further discussion, we have our next meeting scheduled for May 13th at 7 p.m. right here. So I would adjourn this meeting at 7:54.